Hello, and welcome back to another edition of Be Well Together. I'm thrilled that you are prioritizing your own health and your own well-being and just carving out 30 minutes to just focus on you. And today we have, back by popular demand, the one and only Dr. Kim Norman, who is such a lovely and important member of our Ohana. Dr. Norman, if this is your first time tuning in, is a leading psychiatrist. He's a distinguished professor of adolescent and young adult health at UCSF. He has been on previously to talk to us about supporting your children, supporting your families, about managing feelings of isolation. And today he is going to talk to us about grief, which, wow, so many things have not quite gone the way we were planning them to go this year, and so much letting go and so much fear. And I'm really, really thrilled that you can be with us today, Dr. Norman, because I feel like this is a subject matter that, building up some internal resilience for and understanding how to manage is something that we're going to be able to take with us long after the pandemic is over. So thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be part of the series, and I've been watching all of them, and it's really a wonderful thing that we're offering to everyone. So today we're talking about grief, and I'm going to begin with a quote from William Shakespeare. Now, when Shakespeare was quarantined for 2 years to stay safe in the pandemic of bubonic plague, he actually wrote 3 plays. He wrote Macbeth, King Lear, and Antony and Cleopatra. Now, we can't all live up to that kind of a expectation, but he did write these plays while in quarantine. The Globe Theatre was closed. Crowds could not assemble. There were no theaters that were open anywhere in England. But I want to start with a quote from Macbeth, in which Shakespeare wrote, "Give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak knits up the o'erwrought heart and bids it break." So again, grief that does not speak breaks our hearts, both literally and metaphorically speaking. I'd like to begin this talk really by talking about a collective grief that we're all experiencing right now. We know the world has changed, and it has. We know we'll get through it, but we don't know what the new normal is going to be. The world changed after 9/11 and certainly changing in the aftermath of this pandemic. We feel a loss of connection to others. We feel a loss of freedom. I haven't been told I had to be home since I was in the 5th grade, and my mother told me I had to come home when the streetlights were on. That's the last time I was told I had to stay at home. We're worried about the impact on the economy. We know it's going to be bad. We don't know how bad. We need to give this grief a name, because it is grief. We feel angsty, uncertain, restless, worried. We have ominous feelings about the future. Like a hurricane that's about to come on shore. We know it's going to be bad. We don't know how bad. For those of you who are Game of Thrones aficionados, winter is coming is the kind of feeling that we have. We call this anticipatory grief. Again, we know that something is going to happen. We don't know what it is, how bad it's going to be. And by simply naming it, by acknowledging that we are all already feeling a form of grief, just helps give words to it, helps give words to sorrow, helps grief speak. To manage anticipatory grief that we all feel right now, we need to practice 3 basic principles. Now, you've heard these from me, from Arianna Huffington, from Jack Kornfield, from the monastics. I think we've all spoken to these 3 principles. But first and foremost is to stay in the moment. That's why we put so much emphasis on mindfulness and meditation. Don't worry about what's going to happen in the fall. Stay focused on today and appreciating and taking in today. Stay in the moment. Don't review regrets from the past. Don't worry about the future. Stay present. The second principle is focus on what you can control. I like to recite the serenity prayer, where you ask for the serenity to accept the things you cannot change, the courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Focus on staying safe, focus on being kind and helpful and useful, focus on what you can control. And the third principle is do not judge. You're doing the best you can. Feel good about the fact that you're doing the best you can. Dig deep to find compassion, for yourself and what you're doing, and also find compassion for other people. We got to cut each other slack. Like yesterday, my wife banished me to our rooftop deck because, well, evidently I can be annoying when she's trying to get work done. I mean, who knew? But I didn't get mad. We just looked at each other and chuckled, and I went upstairs. But we got to cut each other slack, and again, dig deep for compassion. Humor, lightheartedness can help in anticipatory grief, but it's important in having humor to not trivialize or distract from the fact that grief needs words. So now let's turn our attention to grief when we lose somebody that we love. I think as of this morning, there are over 2 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 around the world, and about 140,000 people have died. So chances are somebody or somebody close to you has died. You're at most one person removed, somebody who has lost somebody dear to them. We all are also mourning the loss of celebrities. I never met Ellis Marsalis, who is the great jazz pianist, but I love his music. And I feel that sadness that he's no longer with us. He was one of the first in New Orleans to succumb to the virus. The word grief is rooted in the Latin word gravis, which means heavy, weighty, and grief is certainly heavy. The word mourning is rooted in an Old English word for expressing sorrow. And in fact, the difference between grief and mourning, here we sometimes go back interchangeably. Grief is the pain we feel inside over loss. Mourning is how we express our sorrow. And finally, I want to say the word bereavement, which is the word we apply to the process of grieving, means being torn apart. And that's how bereavement feels, it's being torn apart. C.S. Lewis, the man who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, one of my favorite series, also wrote an essay called A Grief Observed, which was his experience of grief when he lost his wife to cancer. And he writes that no one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. He said, I'm not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning, I keep swallowing. He described a blanket between his brain and the world, a numbness that we feel when we're grieving. And we see this in mass grief where people walk around in a daze. He felt like he was concussed. He couldn't remember things. He couldn't take things in. And he described a vast emptiness and deep, deep yearning for his wife. Grief is a roller coaster. There are good days, there are bad days, there are numb days. Grief includes feeling numbness, shock, sense of unreality, anger, fear, panic, irritability, guilt, disbelief, helplessness, loneliness, isolation, worry, and shame. We also have a saying in grief and in trauma that the body keeps the score, and grief affects us bodily. We can't sleep, or we can only sleep. We lose our appetite, or we can't stop binging on comfort foods. Grief is intensely personal, yet it also shares a commonality with all grief. Grief is private, very private, yet it's also essential that healing is social. Grief is private, but healing is social. Grief is not something we muscle through. Grief is something to embrace, to reflect upon, and to grow as a person. As we heal from grief, the grief doesn't get smaller, we get bigger. Now, many of you are aware of the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, whose seminal book on death and dying talked about 5 stages of grief. Now, let's be clear, grief does not follow necessarily linearly 5 stages, but it's worth reviewing them because in those 5 stages, you'll see all of the elements that are part of grief. So the 5 stages you're probably familiar with are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I'm going to add 2 others. One is finding meaning. In fact, David Kessler, who is a collaborator with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, has written a book called The Sixth Stage, Finding Meaning, the Sixth Stage. And I'm going to talk about a stage about finding our values and putting our values in action. That's also an important part of healing from grief. So let's go through them. Denial, it's honest self-deception. We can't believe this is happening. We're numb and in disbelief. You know, sometimes when we lose someone we love, we can walk up to a total stranger and tap them on the shoulder because we think it's the person we lost, but it was just somebody who had a similar stature. Denial helps us, gives us time to get used to the loss, to get used to that new normal, to start to process what's, you know, in Hamilton they call to deal with the unimaginable, you know, to accept the unacceptable. It takes time, and sometimes we have to do it in phases. But denial can be very dangerous too. Governments, municipalities who were in denial of the dangers of COVID and did not order shelter at home, people who are ignoring the order and gathering at beaches are in a dangerous state of denial. So we need, you know, to pace ourselves, but we also need to not be in denial. The second stage is anger. You know, grief demands an explanation. We've got to, how could this happen? Who is responsible? How could this be? Why weren't we prepared for this? Why couldn't we stop this? And if we're not careful, the anger turns to blame. You know, and at its worst, we see, for example, a rise in racism against people who are Chinese nationals or of Chinese ancestry, who we turn our fear or hurt into anger and to blame. I see this very often in counseling parents who've lost a child. You know, we have a word for children who lose a parent if they become orphans. Husbands and wives become, you know, widower, widower. We don't even have a word to describe parents who lose a child because it is so unbearable. But I've seen very often where those parents turn their hurt into anger and blame of one another, and the marriages break apart. It's a time when people need to stick together, but the anger part of grief is really hard. You know, we have at least two big problems in this country that fuel the spread of COVID. You know, one is extreme political polarization. This is not a time to point fingers at blame. This is a time for us all to work together to follow science and find the solution. The other big problem is we know there are huge gaps in healthcare equity. There's a healthcare disparity crisis where not everybody has the same access to healthcare. And so we need to really dig deep and embrace equality as our value and work to change that over time. And we need to turn that anger into, again, positive action, doing what we can instead of blaming whoever for not having enough personal protective equipment. Let's join that drive to gather it and distribute it to hospitals that need it. And let's remember too, this pandemic will pass, it will. And we still have the crisis of climate change. We all have to come together to work on that. So channel the anger into positive action. The next phase is bargaining. And that's when we talk to God or whomever about, you know, we make promises. If I change, if only I, you know, bring my loved one back, I'll be a better person, make this a nightmare, not a reality. We go through all the woulda, coulda, shouldas. You know, maybe I should have done this. If only I'd done that. I shouldn't have let my parents go on that cruise. I should never have allowed my grandmother to be in a nursing home. You know, we blame and we bargain and we sometimes even rewrite history. When we blame ourselves, kind of gives us a sense of control. If I'm to blame, if I caused it, maybe I can fix it. And that's one of the meanings of guilt. But there's another part of guilt that comes out of this phase. And to me, survivor guilt is really a form of love. I've talked to many, many, many veterans of the global war on terror who feel tremendous survivor guilt that I was the squad leader. I sent my team to the left and they hit a roadside bomb. If only I'd sent them to the right. And I know I couldn't have known right or left what was where, but I gave that order. And when I talk to them about that survivor guilt really being a form of love, the guilt they carry is the love they carry, it helps them switch the guilt into remembering how deeply they love the person who died, and they start to feel better. In this phase too, we often feel very conflicted about carrying on with life, like somehow it's disrespectful. How can I go on with life as usual? Would that be disrespectful and not paying proper homage to the person who died? And in fact, we have to do both. We have to acknowledge and honor and speak the grief for the person who died, and life must go on. Certainly, no one lives forever. And when I pass, I don't want my children, my grandchildren to stop their lives. Yes, they will go through a period of grief, but I want life to go on, and I take comfort in the knowledge that life will go on. The next phase, depression, is when we feel sad, lonely, depressed, empty, nothing matters, can't imagine ever feeling joy again. And then we go into the phase of acceptance. In the depression phase, we have trouble finding meaning. With acceptance, we start to feel like a normalcy again, like I can have some joy in life, and that maybe I can find some meaning and purpose. In fact, when we find meaning in the life that the person we lost led and how they impacted us, we start to find meaning. When I lose somebody, I start by writing a gratitude letter, because it really helps me get in touch with who they are, who they were, how they lived their life, what mattered to them, and how it impacted me. I helped counsel a woman an elderly woman who lost her middle-aged son to melanoma. And she was angry at the world. How could this be? I'm the one who should have been taken, not my son. He was wonderful. And then she told me that one day she was walking from her doorstep down the stairs to the street and holding onto a handrail. And then her son had constructed that handrail some 15 years earlier, and she made fun of him, saying, I'll never use it, but she was using it. And she said, as I held that rail, I felt his presence, and I was filled with love for him and tremendous gratitude for the time that we had together. And that was the turning point for her. She found meaning and purpose in that. We know from the work of Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, that even in the most horrific circumstance of a Nazi death camp, you can find meaning through love of the fellow prisoners, through a spiritual love, through doing meaningful work. And meaningful work is, to me, defined as work that's true to your core values. And you can find meaning by showing courage in the face of adversity, which we are all doing collectively. That's finding meaning. And now I want to just turn to values. I do feel so blessed to be part of an ohana that is rooted in core values. We value trust and equality and creativity and innovation, and we value love. So I want to end my portion by quoting a line from Dylan Thomas, who wrote the poem, "And Death Shall Have No Dominion." Many of you know Dylan Thomas, a genius Welsh poet, but you certainly know Bob Dylan, who was born Bob Zimmerman, but changed his name to Bob Dylan out of homage to Dylan Thomas. But anyway, in the poem, "And Death Shall Have No Dominion," in the first stanza, there's a line, "Though lovers be lost, love shall not." I'm going to say it again. "Though lovers be lost, love shall not." And that, to me, is what is so comforting in grief. If we're lucky, we live to be 110 and have 110 great years, but we still eventually pass. But love continues on. The values that we cherish the most, love and kindness, trust, equality, justice, creativity. I'll go through a whole long list of them in another talk, but the values that we cherish live on, and to me, that is what's most comforting in grief. So let me stop there and take some questions.
Oh my gosh, I have fervently been writing down so many notes. Thank you. And I love all of the poetry and the art and the warmth that you've brought to such a difficult conversation. One thing that I wrote down that I'd like you to maybe expand upon a little bit is you say grief is private, but healing is social. Mm-hmm. And that really seems to kind of fly in the face of where we are at right now. People are having loved ones die and they can't gather for a funeral, and they can't, do those things when we try to wrap our arms around each other.
Yes. Yes.
and we can't do that right now. And so what are your thoughts about, this isolation, and how do
Yeah.
we really get to healing when we can't be social?
Yeah. Well, it's a challenge because we do need grief. So we do grief requires a witness. It requires sharing your grief with other people and mourning together. So we have to do things virtually as best we can. We can have virtual services right now, and we can plan to have in-person memorials later. Again, there's no timetable. Sometimes people feel like, well, my loved one died, 8 weeks ago. Shouldn't I be over it now? No, you shouldn't. Grief, the process of grief can take years. And I really do think it's important to note the grief doesn't get smaller. We get bigger as we heal and we grow, but the grief is there within us. You know, we have a sense, as our culture has become increasingly secular, we've moved away from the rituals, the bonding rituals with others and sharing grief, I think way too much. So I think for right now, write the gratitude letter, talk to others who shared the loss, virtually, have a virtual service, and then, when we are allowed to gather again as a congregation, we can
To come
do
together
the normal
and
come together in person, but we certainly
right.
can come together through letters, through video chats, through
Yeah.
phone
I
calls.
love the gratitude letter. I really like that. Another thing that I think that is interesting is, there's so many different kinds of grief,
Hmm.
and there's so many people dealing with different kinds of grief. It could be, I didn't get to finish up my senior year in high school.
Hmm. Yes.
I lost a loved one, and I'm curious, your thoughts about how we support one another in when there's so many different levels and there's so many different kinds, and you can't even really get your arms around all of the kinds of grief
Yeah.
that people are experiencing.
Yeah, grief is the pain that we feel when there's loss, and the loss certainly, we've been talking about losing a loved one, but the loss can be my senior year in high school. I feel a loss over, I love watching basketball, and I was really looking forward to opening day in baseball,
Yeah.
but we have to accept those losses. Partly, again, we talk about gratitude toward the person we lost. I think it helps to have gratitude that I'm alive. I have people who care about me, whom I love, and that's important. And in having that gratitude, like, okay, I don't get to have a senior prom or high school graduation. Well, some people have died, but it's important in getting perspective that we don't trivialize that it really is a true loss. Not being able to have your senior prom, not being able to have that graduation, wondering about it. I've talked to so many kids who are so excited about the colleges they got accepted to, and they don't know if they're going to be able to start in the fall. So again, we want to validate that as, of course you're grieving, of course you're uncertain, of course that is sad, and yet one way or another you're going to go to college. College will resume and will be complete. So what I'm really trying to say is in having perspective, because when there's mass loss like this, sometimes people feel, how can I complain about the fact that
Right. I
I
mean, I
lost
thought that,
somebody.
yeah, the thing that you were saying about like the guilt you carry is the love you carry.
Yes.
I feel like I'm carrying a lot of guilt.
Yes. Yeah.
I have a job. My
Yes.
family is healthy,
Yes.
and I'm trying to still rationalize that my children are just
Yeah.
wounded that they can't go to
No,
school.
exactly. You know, 140,000 people have lost their lives, and I'm upset because I couldn't go to opening day for baseball. I mean, right?
Right.
But it's
Right.
yet it is a loss. Baseball, and I like to watch sports. Is an important part of life to me. It is a loss, so I need to acknowledge and validate that's a loss, and yet life will go on, and sports will return when they return. So it's that balancing of in having perspective. Don't trivialize, don't dismiss. And again, Shakespeare, give sour words, a grief that does not speak will break your heart. So make sure you get to speak to all those losses,
Mm,
some small, some large, and get validation, get support. Have somebody
yes.
say to you, yeah, that's really hard.
Yeah. That's great. Catherine, do we have any questions that we want to bring up for Dr. Norman?
We do have a question. So, Dr. Norman, can you speak to the challenges of grieving while parenting and going through that grief process while also trying to remain strong for young kids?
Yes. If you're grieving as a parent, chances are your children are grieving for the same thing as well. But we have to think about what we mean by being strong. Being strong doesn't mean we don't speak to the grief. Being strong doesn't mean we never cry. In fact, modeling that, I'm sad, I'm crying because grandma passed away, acknowledges that's important. I feel tremendous sadness and I'm crying, but I'm okay. So I think we say to them, I'm okay, I'm grieving. I'm okay. This is a natural part of feeling loss. I miss grandma. So I think we speak to it, we explain this is a time we're going through. It's transitory. We will get through the grief. Grandma will always live in our heart. Right now, I'm feeling really sad. And so we validate and normalize the grieving process, and we give the children a chance to express it themselves. Now, the children will vary, and they'll say, "I'm fine." You may not want to talk about it, but even when you raise with them, would you like to talk about it? You want to talk about grandma? Want to write a letter to grandma, or do a drawing for her? Some will say yes, some will say no, but they'll know that you're giving them the message that the grieving is normal and that you can hear it, you can handle it, that you're not too fragile, that you'll be overwhelmed by it. But no, don't be afraid to show emotions for your, in front of your children. They'll model with you. They'll learn that we can wear our hearts on our sleeves sometime, and that we can outwardly express emotion, and that's a healthy way to be.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. For just coming up on our time. I feel like I'm going to bookmark this on the archives, and I'm going to keep coming back to this. And for all of you tuning in, this will be archived as well on Salesforce Live. It'll also be archived if you're an employee and Vidyard and our Be Well Together page. So thank you. Thank you. I feel like this is a long journey ahead, and these are really great pearls that we can keep coming back to. And as always, I will look forward to seeing you again soon, Dr. Norman. So thank you very much.
And thank you very much for having me.
Of course,
Bye-bye.
of course. Everyone have a great day. Take care. Be
Bye-bye.
well.